Sylvester Stallone utterly hated him more than anyone. Sylvester Stallone was once Hollywood's ultimate underdog turned king, the man who weaponized rejection and made Rocky Balboa immortal. Right now, in 2026, he's pulling in over $1.5 million per episode on Tulsa King, developing a Quentin Tarantino collaboration, and planning a fourth season that fans are already counting down to. He has outlasted trends, critics, and entire generations of action stars. But behind every triumph, there was one man who made his blood boil more than any villain he ever faced on screen. Their rivalry wasn't friendly competition. It was a private war built on pride, manipulation, public humiliation, and one Hollywood trap that Stallone walked straight into. So what really happened between them, and why did Stallone hate him more than anyone else? The rival enters. In 1977, Sylvester Stallone walked into the Golden Globes as a man who had forced Hollywood to reconsider everything it thought it knew about him. Not long before that night, he had been struggling, unknown, and turned away by studios that refused to see him as leading man material. Then came Rocky, a script he wrote himself and refused to sell unless he could play the role. It was a risk that redefined his life. Now he stood inside the Beverly Hilton, surrounded by the very people who had once dismissed him, watching as the industry finally acknowledged what he had built. Not far from him stood Arnold Schwarzenegger. At that point, Arnold was still finding his footing as an actor, but he was already impossible to ignore. His bodybuilding career had made him a physical landmark. He did not blend into any room. He moved through the ballroom with the kind of certainty that suggested he was not interested in waiting his turn. The contrast between the two men formed immediately. Stallone's story was built on struggle and survival. His characters carried pain and pushed through it. Arnold's image was something different, controlled, dominant, unbothered. Where Stallone told a story of endurance, Arnold projected inevitability. Hollywood noticed. The industry thrives on contrast, and that night, it found exactly what it needed. Two rising forces. One spotlight. The conditions for something far more complicated had been quietly set. The ballroom tension. The 1977 Golden Globes did not begin as a battleground, but by the end of the night, it carried a tension that neither man would forget. Rocky was nominated in major categories, placing Stallone at the center of the room. For a man who had spent years being overlooked, every reaction and every result carried emotional weight far beyond the ceremony itself. Arnold was present that evening, recognized for his performance in Stay Hungry. Though still building his acting profile, he did not carry himself like someone uncertain of his future. His background, his posture, and his presence made him stand apart from every other newcomer in the room. When Rocky secured Best Picture, the moment felt like confirmation. Stallone had arrived. But even within that triumph, the awareness of Arnold's presence added a layer of tension that did not dissolve with the applause. The room had seen two different visions of what a Hollywood star could look like, and it was already choosing sides, even if no one said so directly. What seemed subtle that evening would later become defining. Without a single confrontation, the foundation of one of Hollywood's most consuming rivalries had been quietly laid. Muscles became the message. Through the 1980s, Stallone and Arnold stopped being rising stars and became the action genre itself. Stallone carried Rocky and Rambo characters defined by suffering, persistence, and earned strength. Arnold carried Conan, Commando, and Predator, figures of absolute physical dominance who rarely showed weakness. Together, they redefined what audiences expected from a hero. The competition moved beyond the screen quickly. Training became a form of public statement. Stallone pushed toward a lean, shredded physique most visible in Rocky III, while Arnold maintained the massive, full build of a world champion bodybuilder. Every poster, every interview, and every public appearance reinforced the contrast. Even body count became a metric audiences tracked between them. One film would establish a new scale of destruction. The next would exceed it. The escalation was deliberate on both sides, fueled not just by audience demand but by the awareness that the other was always watching. The rivalry shaped casting decisions, timing, and marketing strategies throughout the decade. Each move was made with one eye on the other. What began as comparison hardened into something closer to obsession, and obsession, over time, tends to cost more than it returns. The body paid first. Stallone built his reputation on a specific kind of authenticity. He did not want his characters to merely appear strong. He wanted audiences to feel the impact as something real. During the production of Rocky IV, that commitment crossed a dangerous line. He pushed for contact that would register on camera as genuine force. Dolph Lundgren delivered it. The result was a hospitalization, with Stallone sustaining serious injury including swelling around his heart. The incident became part of the film's mythology. Media reported it. Audiences absorbed it. The narrative reinforced his image as someone who refused to pull back from pain. But that image also set a standard that was nearly impossible to maintain without permanent consequence. Arnold faced a different kind of pressure. His entire screen presence depended on consistency. Appearing anything less than physically dominant was not an option. Maintaining that level required a discipline that left almost no room for adjustment. As the years passed, the gap between the image and the reality behind it widened steadily for both men. The rivalry did not directly cause every injury or every consequence, but it created an environment where restraint was seen as weakness. In that environment, the body was always the first thing to pay. The movie that backfired. By the early 1990s, Stallone was at a crossroads. The action formula that had made him a legend was beginning to feel like a constraint. He needed to demonstrate range. When Stop or My Mom Will Shoot crossed his desk, it looked like an opportunity. A comedy. A departure. A chance to show audiences something new. What he did not fully account for was how the decision had been shaped not by creative instinct, but by rivalry. Arnold has since explained, including in the TMZ documentary Arnold and Sly, Rivals, Friends, Icons released in late 2025, that he had been linked to the project and used that connection deliberately. He understood Stallone well enough to know that Arnold's apparent interest in a role would make it instantly more attractive to his rival. The implication was clear: he had effectively steered Stallone toward a project he already suspected would fail. The film's reception was swift and brutal. Critics described it as unfocused and disconnected from everything that had made Stallone's career worth following. The performance did not expand his image. It exposed a gap between who he was on screen and what the script required. Audiences who had followed him through Blood and Determination did not buy the shift. The damage was not just professional. Arnold's later comments about the situation framed it with a candor that made the wound sharper. He had anticipated Stallone's reaction, understood the psychology driving it, and acted accordingly. The rival had not beaten him in a box office race. He had manipulated him into defeating himself. Pride becomes the weakness. The fallout from Stop or My Mom Will Shoot did not leave when the film did. It became a reference point, evidence that Stallone's decision-making had, at a critical moment, been driven by competitive instinct rather than creative judgment. This mattered because of what Stallone's entire career had been built on. He had written Rocky under financial pressure and refused to surrender the lead role even when studios offered real money for the script without him. That was an act of pure self-belief. What happened with the comedy suggested something had shifted. External pressure, the need to respond, to keep pace, to not let Arnold claim anything, had entered the process in a way that overrode his instincts. Arnold eventually acknowledged on SiriusXM's Radio Andy with Andy Cohen that the two, in fact, were not fans of each other at all during those years. But the admission came later, after the war had already been fought. In the heat of the rivalry, Arnold's awareness of how Stallone would react became a strategic tool, and Stallone had no equivalent defense against it. Entertainment now. Competition can sharpen a person. It can also narrow them. When every decision is filtered through the question of how it compares to what the rival is doing, the answers start to come from the wrong place. Stallone had built his entire identity on knowing his own direction. The rivalry, at its most intense, temporarily cost him that. The cost finally showed. By the mid-90s, the landscape both men had shaped began to change around them. New genres emerged. Technology transformed what audiences expected from spectacle. The lone, muscle-bound hero carrying the weight of the world became a formula audiences recognized rather than experienced. The dominance that had seemed permanent began to require defense rather than simply assertion. The physical cost accumulated alongside the professional one. Decades of intense training, repeated strain, and the refusal to slow down had left marks that could no longer be ignored. Recovery took longer. The margin for pushing past limits grew smaller. What had once been managed through sheer will began to require genuine adjustment. Both men eventually acknowledged their shared path, that pushing through pain was simply what driven people like them did to reach the top. That understanding, born from years of competing against each other, became the unexpected foundation of a friendship that neither would have predicted during the height of their war. TMZ. Their reconciliation began when Schwarzenegger invited Stallone to join the Planet Hollywood franchise in 1991, a decision that brought them together in business after years of opposition. The shared venture shifted something. Two men who had spent a decade trying to outlast each other began to see the other as the only person who truly understood what the experience had required. Entertainment now. Today, Stallone is in a different kind of chapter entirely. Tulsa King has become one of the most watched series on Paramount Plus, with a fourth season confirmed and a Quentin Tarantino collaboration in development. In the 2023 Netflix documentary about Schwarzenegger's life, Stallone acknowledged that Arnold had ultimately surpassed him in box office success and cultural prominence, stating simply, he wanted to be number one. That admission, quiet and without bitterness, said more about where both men had arrived than any rivalry statistic ever could. Wikipedia. The story of Stallone and Schwarzenegger was never really about hatred. It was about what happens when two exceptionally driven people spend a decade measuring themselves entirely against each other. Both rose because of it. Both paid because of it. And both eventually found that the only way through the rivalry was to stop letting it lead. That is why their story still matters, not because of the muscles, the explosions, or the box office numbers. But because pride, held too tightly for too long, has a way of turning into the very opponent you cannot beat.